Fort Mifflin was decommissioned in 1962 after nearly 200 years of service.
Fort Mifflin was used all the way up until the Korean War. In other words, from 1771 to 1954. It's the oldest fort in continuous use in the United States. It was decommissioned after the Korean War because it basically had not a lot of use at that point to the Army. It had been a Confederate prison camp during the Civil War, gunned and ready during 1812, a huge part of a huge supply depot during World War I and World War II. But by the Korean War, the Army pretty much decided they wanted bathrooms, they wanted telephones and the whole thing. So the Army Corps of Engineers, who was actually born here at Fort Mifflin, moved next door. They decommissioned the fort. It went over to the city of Philadelphia.
In 1989, the nonprofit organization Fort Mifflin on the Delaware took over the operation of the fort. One of the organization's main jobs is to provide tours and information for visitors to the fort. Although every tour given at the fort is wonderful, several groups of visitors to the fort truly had tour guides who were out of this world.
Someone has walked out after being in the casemates or in the dungeon area and complimented me on what a great tour they got. Well, you know, the first time it happened, I'm thinking, well, actually both times. I'm thinking, well, this is nice. I'll tell the guide that they had a great tour. And I said to the person, I remember the first time it was a woman, I said, well, who was the guide? And she said, oh, he was a younger gentleman, which would have made sense. And I said to her, well, how was he dressed? And it happened to be a Rev War day. Okay, so all my guides were dressed in Revolutionary War uniform. She said, oh, he's in a Civil War uniform, nice blue uniform with the hat and everything. And I'm thinking, there's nobody in there like that. So she said, of course, I didn't tell her that. I didn't tell her anything, and I came in, and there was nobody here. It happened to me again. Somebody else came out one time and said, I just had this great tour by this Civil War guide. They went on and on and on about it. Nobody here. Well, you're thinking, well, you know, these people are hallucinating. But actually, once I began to tell my staff about it, one of my other staff members had the exact same thing. He is a guide here. He was out in the parade ground. One of the visitors walked out and told him what a great tour he'd had in the dungeon area that the other guide had given him. And, of course, it was a guy explained in a Civil War uniform, and there was nobody here. But who knows?
The same thing seems to have happened in the Powder magazine.
There's been several occasions where people have congratulated the tour guide in there. All the tour guides were not in there. So we don't know who it was. But somebody gave a good talk while the tourists were in there. Because the tourists were congratulating on how good he was and how authentic he looked. So we don't know. We didn't see him.
In spite of all the bizarre encounters at the fort, the staff claims they are not frightened by their old-fashioned co-inhabitants.
Nothing here has ever really scared us. I think maybe it scares the visitors sometimes, you know, if they think something's going on. But everything that's happened here has been very friendly, very non-offensive. You know, these spirits, if they are here, they're very, what would you say? They're low-key. You know, they're just kind of like doing their thing.
What should you do if you encounter a ghost during your visit to Fort Mifflin?
If you came to Fort Mifflin and encountered a spirit, my first word of advice would be don't be afraid. There isn't very much that they can do other than startle you or make some noise or maybe move a small object, something of that caliber. There is no reason to be afraid of spirits. They were people at one time. If you're not afraid of people, why be afraid of spirits or the phenomenon that they cause?
But is Fort Mifflin really haunted?
I would have to say that Fort Mifflin is genuinely haunted, and it's a great experience to come into a place and have a piece of history actually interact with you in a place like Fort Mifflin.
The ghosts of Fort Mifflin act as a constant reminder of the rich history of this former military stronghold. They reach out through time to remind us that the suffering and sorrow of war doesn't end with a ceasefire. Sometimes the wounds of war stay forever, haunting us for eternity.